I get chills every time I hear that. It starts here, and you're here today, and you're going to be so glad that you joined us for our Frontiers of Brain Health. What is our purpose here at the Center for Brain Health? We want each and every one of you to realize, don't look at that, Ian, it's a surprise. That's coming later. Is that we want each one of you to know that solutions for your brain are ready today. Every one of us is worried about our brain. As this said, if I were to ask you, what are you concerned about? What are you concerned about? But did you know that every single day there's things you can do, and we've got the science to show it, and we want you to be part of our movement. The fact that you're here shows me that you're already there. A moonshot to optimize brain health has never been more urgent nor more possible because of the discoveries that we're making with our collaborators all over the world, and one of them that's with us today that I have the distinct pleasure to introduce. Your brain health is really the new frontier of human potential. Do you want your best year for your potential to be better than it is this year? Then you better focus on your brain health. So that's what we're all about. So I'm going to get to introduce my friend, my colleague. I think I should call him Dr. Ian Robertson, because just this past year, he was recognized. So now we can show the slide. He was recognized, not only did he already have his PhD, but he had, is it coming up, the slide? Oh, do I have to do something? Oh, well, he'll come do it for me. He was recognized with the Doctor of Science as well as an MD honorary from Trinity College. And look at this, celebrating with his, it's not up there. Oh, well, you saw it before. They flashed it and then took it away. Doesn't it just make you happy to know that? Well, he was recognized for his unparalleled discoveries. Dr. Ian Robertson started the whole department of neuroscience at Trinity College. Trinity College in Dublin is like the Harvard of the United States. It is known for the most leading-edge work. He was the co-director of the Global Brain Health Initiative that is training different interns from around the world join forces with UCSF so that people can deliver treatments for Alzheimer's disease and think about it. But what he said he's proudest of, and I'm going to write, you're proudest of, being the co-leader with me on the Brain Health Project. More than 10 years ago, Ian came to speak at our Brain Health Presents, and it was just at that moment that I said, there is my science soulmate. Over across the pond, he was doing things to advance brain health and develop measures and use executive function to help people. We were here, and we've been working together ever since. When he comes here regularly now, we have this whole infusion, and I can see that you are now infused with Dr. Ian Robertson. Who doesn't want to be confident as we age? I can hardly wait to hear what I learn. Write your questions down. The people that are here, we are now reaching 500 people with these Frontiers of Brain Health. So there's about 100 of you here today, probably about 400 online. Thank you for joining us online, and we will make time for your questions. Be curious, have fun, and be confident. And, one more thing, his book, Amazon. So when you leave here today, you must get a copy of How Confidence Works. You can go online right now and order it. How Confidence Works. You will love everything in here. So I had to do a plug for his incredible book. Dr. Ian Robertson.
Thank you. Well, I come to Dallas several times a year to get my infusion of youthful energy, and I get it from my colleague and leader and mentor and inspirer is Sandy Chapman in this amazing place. So it's wonderful to have the support of all of you who come to these, so the incredible generosity of Texas in helping this amazing enterprise, which is the culmination of my career is the ability to work on the Brain Health project with Sandy and the team here. So thank you, Sandy, and have the privilege of being here. So I'm going to, I want to talk about confident aging. And here's the 4 things I'm going to say to you. Our brain aging is being accelerated by inaccurate beliefs about the effects of age on the brain. I'm arguing that these sabotage our sense of control, and they can cause toxic positive feedback loops. And by positive, I mean accelerating, not good, and which can be neutralized by confidence. That's what I'm going to say. So let's go to the first one. Brain aging is accelerated by inaccurate beliefs. So this is a study that was done several years ago in the UK. And what they took was a group of people who were on average 65. Everyone taking part was 65. But they randomly allocated them to 4 groups. And they gave them all a dementia screening test. Now, this is the kind of screening test you would give your family practitioner might give you if you if you said your memory was starting to go bad. And it was, so the test doesn't diagnose dementia, but says, you know, you are at very high risk or not, and you require further assessment in a specialist clinic. So that was the outcome measure. Now, the 4 groups were this. First of all, half of the people were told they were the youngsters in a group of 60 to 90-year-olds. And half of the group were told they were the oldies in a group of 50 to 70-year-olds. So that was the first manipulation. You believed you were young, relatively, versus you believed you were old, relatively. The other manipulation was this. They got half the people in each group got a scientific article to read, or a kind of newspaper article based on science. And one of these articles said, aging is associated with, particularly with problems in memory that can be remediated by technology and by strategies. The other article said, aging is associated with progressive cognitive decline across all your faculties, okay? And no mention of remediation. And so they then, so you had 4 groups, thought they were old, thought they were young, read specific memory problems story about aging, read a progressive cognitive decline story of aging. So then they gave them the test. So let's look, see what happened. There's the 4 groups, okay? So the top left there. So you believe you're in the young end of a 60 to 90-year-old group, and you've read that your aging has specific effects on your memory that are correctable. 20% of people were recommended for further screening for dementia, this group of people, which is quite a high rate, okay? So then we have those who believed they were the older ones in the group, and who read the same thing about memory, 5% of them. Now don't pay too much attention to the specific numbers because there's randomness in there. And so the ones that believed I'm in the young end of the 60 to 90-year-old group and that aging causes a general loss of cognitive function, only 10% of them were recommended to be sent to a specialist clinic for screening for dementia. But then what about this group? They were told they were old, relatively, and they read this depressing story about progressive loss of cognitive function with aging. How many of them do you think were referred for further screening of dementia? 70%. So what that tells you is that your your cognitive performance is hugely affected by what you believe about your brain. Now, this is from the World Economic Forum 2025 Global Report from the International Monetary Fund on global aging. And here's what they found. Across 41 countries, they found that the cognitive performance of a 70-year-old in 2022 is the same as the cognitive performance of a 53-year-old in 2000. So in 22 years, you have this increase in cognitive ability. Now, this is reflected in a number of statistics, including the likelihood of being diagnosed with dementia. That's becoming later and later in developed and developing countries, and also things like stroke and heart attack. So there's a general improvement in cardiovascular function that's reflected in the brain, and there are maybe other factors here. We're all more likely to be working out, to be eating well, etc. So maybe we don't know the various factors that explain this remarkable change in our brains over just a period of 2 decades. So here I'm going to ask you some questions. Are you physically active? Have you got a post-high school education? Are you connected to other people? Are you a non-smoker? And are you mentally engaged with the world? So what I'm going to say to all of you is that if you are in that category, and I believe that most of you in this room probably are, then the conventional beliefs about what aging does to your brain and the metrics we have internalized about what being 70 or 80 or 90 or 60 or 50 means are completely out of date, given the changes that have been happening. But our mental models are stuck in outdated models of brain aging. So if you're doing these things, then your mental model of what you can and cannot do, of what you should and should not be doing, is probably extremely wrong. So the conclusion of the IMF World Economic Forum report was that the 70s is the new 50s. And so I'm just going to speculate here, this is not based on science what I'm going to say, that we should all subtract a certain amount of years from our self-concept of how old we are, from our chronological age. And I'm suggesting if you're 70, you should subtract 20. If you're 60, 17. This is me extrapolating downwards. This is not based on clear science. So this is a thought exercise here, okay? If you're 50, subtract 14. If you're 40, subtract 11. And if you're 30, subtract 8. Now, the bottom end of the scale, the 30 and the 40-year-olds, we know, I don't know how many people know people who are still living at home or who are having difficulties finding their feet in their career and they're approaching 30 or early 30s. The prefrontal cortex doesn't wire up to fully to the memory centers until 30, roughly 30. So and in developing countries, we take much longer to reach that stage of adulthood. And I would like to propose to you that actually, if we treat our brains properly, that we have an exciting possibility of seeing that development of our brain from age 30 onwards as being a process of maturation and not of decline. So that's my challenge to us all. And however, the mental models we hold about what you're supposed to do or be able to do at each age hold us back. They sabotage us. So when someone performs a memory test, like in that first study I told you, and you're being asked to remember a number of words, remember a picture, the moment you start to do that test, and if you're made aware of stereotypes about what you're supposed to be at that age, you've been made to feel old by the experimental manipulation, and you've been made to feel that there's some internal process over which you have no control, which is causing a decline in your abilities. What does that do? It makes you think about yourself, and it makes you think about your memory. Now, what happens if you think about your feet as you're walking downstairs? You trip and you maybe fall down the stairs. Well, exactly the same is true of your memory. If you've been forced to think about and to act, if you're brought into consciousness, negative stereotypes about your cognitive functions because of your age, and you're being encouraged to think about your age, you will perform worse on a cognitive test because of the anxiety that's aroused. And these are attributions that we make about our behavior. And we know from research on attributions that if you believe that some behavior or some event, if you believe that's caused by something that's inside you, that's internal, and that's stable, that is, it's something that's not going to change, like a genetic factor, for example, and it's global, that is, affects everything about you. So, for instance, in the study I gave you at the beginning, it's global cognitive decline, whereas in the other text that they read, it was problems in memory that can be remedied with technology. So what these do, what that type of attribution does, is to weaken our sense of control. And concepts like old and general cognitive decline weaken our sense of control. And I'm going to be arguing about the BrainHealth project and the BrainHealth Index. What that does is build our sense of control. So just generally, we know from the research that control gives us choice. And we know that choice in both animals and humans is preferable to no choice, even if the outcome is the same as in the no choice situation. So choice is inherently rewarding to the brain. Having control, having choice is inherently rewarding. And exercising choice means believing that you have some control over what happens. So if you don't believe that choice will influence your outcome, you won't exercise the choice. So if you believe that because of your age, you're not going to be able to cognitively do a task, you're not going to engage in the activities to prove that wrong, if you like. Can I just say at one point, I'm talking here about healthy aging. One of the problems about aging is illness becomes more likely as you get older. I'm not wanting to be a Pollyanna here and deny that there's many illnesses that can afflict people which can affect their brain and which maybe they don't have control over. So let me be clear about that. This is not snake oil here. I'm not Pollyanna. I'm talking about the concepts of normal, healthy aging. And we know that if something is rewarding, it's going to activate the reward networks of the brain, particularly the dopamine-fueled reward networks in areas like the ventral striatum. Now, once you activate the reward network in that way, what we know is that one of the problems of aging is it lowers, in some people's eyes, lowers your status. The age stereotypes means that people feel less, they have less status than a vigorous younger person in the meeting. and we have a culture of ageism, certainly more in Europe than in America, where we need a young CEO. We shouldn't have an older CEO. That kind of thinking, and that culture of ageism lowers the status of those who are victims of that ageism. Okay, so what happens to the brain in people depending on your perceived social status? Well, here's what happens. This is from Martinez at Columbia University, showing PET scanning looking at the number of dopamine receptors in your ventral striatum and that reward network that's activated by choice. The higher your social status, the more dopamine activity in your reward network. And what that does, what does that mean? It means you're less depressed, you're more optimistic, you're more less anxious, you're more likely to take action and exercise control. Okay, so this is the curve that we are, I believe, with the inaccurate mental models of aging, having to fight against. So because what we know from aging is, this is a PET scans of the reward network, and these are just examples from people at different ages. You'll see that in your 70s, your reward network has less vigor. There's less of that drive, less of that go-getting drive that we associate with the young. There we have the neurochemical correlates of that. Except, if you look at this, if you remember this graph here, our dopamine receptors aren't completely determined by our genes or biological aging processes over which we don't have a control. They're affected by things like our social status. They're affected by things like about what we do, our motivation, our drive. So I would submit to you that these changes here, at least part of them, are under our control. There's some plasticity we now know in the neurotransmitter systems and not just in the brain as a whole. So here's my third, here's the conclusion of that. Believing that your brain health is under your control by signing up to the Brain Health Project, for example, is critical to taking the steps to improve it. If you hold a medicalized, fatalistic model of your brain aging, you're not going to exercise the control and the choice necessary to produce the changes in your brain that will go against that hypothesis. If you're a genetic fatalist or an age fatalist, then you're cutting yourself off from opportunities to harness the neuroplasticity of the brain, which we've dramatically shown to exist from the very first IMF World Economic Forum study. That's nothing to do with genes, the fact that our cognitive functions have improved 2 decades in 2 decades. Nothing to do with genes. That's plasticity of the brain in civilization. So what these toxic, inaccurate mental models that we have of aging do is they create toxic feedback loops. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, how many of you sometimes feel stiff in the morning? Yeah? And how many of you think, sometimes find yourself thinking, I won't bother bending to pick that thing up. I'll bend like that. I won't bend my knees. I'll ask someone else to pick it up. The stiffness discourages you from doing stuff that causes some discomfort when you exercise that stiffness. So what that results in is positive feedback loops, okay? You have joint stiffness, so you flex less. That creates more stiffness because the lack of flexion increases the stiffness. That restricts your movement even more. So you avoid more activities. And this is what we call a positive feedback loop. It's positive in its self-reinforcing action, not in its effects. The effects are negative. And what I'm going to argue is that feedback loops like that are central to brain aging. So, for example, now staying in the physical domain, you fall when you're out walking and sprain your ankle. So here you have what a younger person would tend to do, or an older person who is not sabotaged by mental models of age. So a younger person falls, has to stop walking for a while because of the ankle while it repairs, loses some fitness, but then gets back up walking, and because they're walking again, there's less fear. The fear of falling declines. And so they don't fall because they're building up their experience of walking without that. That's a healthy feedback loop after a setback. However, this is what happens, and we know this happens if with older people who have a fall, that the fear of falling itself becomes a risk factor for the falling. And so you get this accelerating vicious cycle of reinforcing a set of behaviors that worsen the behavior in question. And we know from research that having fear of falling after a fall is as great a problem as the balance or whatever it is that's caused the fall in the first place. Or you forget someone's name at a party. Now, if you're not victim because of your age or because of your having been to the BrainHealth project, you're not as pessimistic about age-related function. You have a healthy negative feedback loop. That is, yeah, oh, that's embarrassing. I forgot her name. I'm going to make sure I memorize names. I'm going to make a note of them, or I'm just going to do a little encoding strategy. You start to remember names better, and so you have less fear that you're going to do this in future. You've taken action to do this. And so you don't start to second guess yourself about, about your for social gaucheness. And so you don't start having embarrassment and avoidance of social situations, which can happen to people. Okay. Oh, I don't like meeting strangers. I might forget their names. I'll just stick with meeting people from family and people close that I know. And then, so that of course is the positive feedback loop in worsening your performance and creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay. So what we need to have is a healthy feedback loop. We have to replace these toxic feedback loops in aging with a healthy one. We have to believe we can improve our brain function. That's absolutely central that we have that belief. Otherwise, we don't believe we can control it. If we don't believe we can control it, we don't have choice. So we don't activate the reward network in our brain with all the benefits that comes from exercising choice and feeling control, and we don't take the action necessary to remedy whatever deficits are being shown up, whether it's joint stiffness, fear of falling, or forgetting. And that's why taking action follows from this belief and improving our brain health. Taking action to improve our brain health leads to us taking more action, and we get a virtuous, non-toxic cycle. Now, let's just have a look at some of these saboteurs. Here's a very commonly used questionnaire about aging, about whether you have negative or positive expectations of aging. So, for instance, I think about getting old all the time. This happens much more in Europe than it does in North America, I have to say. As I get older, I get wiser. There's a positive expectation. I get depressed when I think about getting older. Negative. I have no control over the effects which getting older has on my social life. Negative. As I get older, there is much I can do to maintain my independence. Positive control belief. So, study of 8,000 people between 50 and 90 in Ireland, the Irish Longitudinal Study on Aging, looked at over a 2-year period, and most of the people were in their 50s and 60s. They were because of the design of the study. So they measured 2 things at time 1. One was how long it took you to stand up from a chair and walk 3 meters and then walk back again. It's called the timed up and go test. Speed of walking is a very, very closely linked to vigor and the state of the health of your brain. And the other one was some cognitive tests, specifically learning a list of 10 words and remembering them, and another one of executive function, of verbal fluency, of how many words can you, how many animals can you name, how many words beginning with A can you name. So they then, 2 years later, they measured all these functions again, having first of all assessed the expectations about aging that the people held, okay? So there's the two sets of tests. And by the way, all the other medical and demographic and everything was controlled for statistically with a big enough group of people to do this. And what we find is that for physical function, the people with negative beliefs about aging, 2 years later, even people in their 50s and 60s were walking on this very brief walking test 1.5 seconds slower. And their cognitive function had similar effects. So this could not be due, it's very, very unlikely, given all the statistical controls, that this was caused by anything other than these mental models that people had about what aging involved, okay? And what they could and could not do. I hypothesize that these 50, 60, and 70-year-olds who started to walk more slowly, who could remember fewer words, who weren't able to generate as many words from their brains, this was possibly due to some of these toxic feedback loops that I'm talking about, okay? This failure to take action, failure to do stuff, avoidance, resulting in a kind of fatalism about what aging entails cognitively and physically and socially. And this is Becca Levy's work in Yale. She showed that similarly, people with negative age stereotypes over a 10-year period. This is, of course, correlational. We have to be careful with cause and effect and correlations, but nevertheless, their hippocampus, the critical memory center, shrank much more in people with negative beliefs about aging. We have to be cautious about correlational studies, but that's just an additional piece of data. So, what I want to say, the fourth and final part of my talk is that confidence is an antidote to these toxic feedback loops, okay? So I have to explain to you what confidence is. What I'll say, first of all, it is not optimism. Optimism is the sunny belief that things will turn out, nor is it self-esteem, which is your evaluation of yourself. The critical thing about confidence is it empowers action. It makes you more likely to do things in a given domain. And it's not general purpose. You can be confident socially, but not intellectually. You can be confident physically, but not. So it's your beliefs about your ability to perform in a particular domain. And it has this confidence carries us over the bridge to the future. The thing about confidence is, it is about bridging to the future, and the future is by definition uncertain. We cannot possibly know with absolute precision and certainty what the future holds. There is always uncertainty there. And therefore, confidence is about bridging that uncertainty. Because what does uncertainty do in the human brain? Well, when we cannot predict, the brain is a prediction machine, and when we cannot predict, we get anxious, okay? So confidence bridges uncertainty, and it bridges anxiety. And these two elements, there's two elements to this. One is, I think I can do that. I think I can do that a welding course in my 70s, or I can do that ceramics course. I can learn or I can run that half marathon, or whatever it is. I believe I can do that. And then there's the outcome. If I do that, I believe that a certain outcome will happen. So I think I can stop smoking, and if I do that, I think my health will improve. Can do, could happen. So that gives us 4 states of the brain. And the first one of these in top left is apathy. The top right is anger, because if you believe you can do something but believe the outcome won't happen, that leads to frustration. Bottom left is anxiety, and bottom right is activation, the activation of confidence. Okay? And these have direct effects on the neurotransmitter of 2 different neurotransmitter systems in the brain. Apathy, we know from research that people who are feel helpless about their lives, who are in a state of apathy, have tonically lower dopamine receptors in their ventral striatum. We know this from Martinez and from others. So apathy is a state that has 5 effects on your brain and on your mind. It makes your mood low, makes your anxiety high, it lowers your motivation and initiative, it makes you less smart, less mentally sharp, because there's less dopamine going into your prefrontal cortex. And fifthly, it lowers your status in other people's eyes and makes you less influential. This is all based on research. So that's what apathy does. Anger, if you believe you could do something, but I could get that college degree, but it's not going to improve my way of life, my finances. That can lead to frustration. That activates the norepinephrine system, which can disrupt the smooth functioning of the brain. That's to do with arousal. Now, bottom left, if only I could change my diet. I know I'd be healthier, so can't do, could happen. That makes people anxious and lowers their mood. That increases norepinephrine as well, and that disrupts brain function, makes it harder to remember, makes it harder to do things. And then there's dopamine in the activation. So confidence is a belief that you can do something, and if you do it, you'll get the outcome. It's not a certainty. You're bridging uncertainty. But the way it works in the brain is the opposite to apathy. It lifts your mood, lowers your anxiety, increases your motivation and likelihood of taking action. It makes you slightly smarter because of the increased dopamine levels in the prefrontal cortex, and it raises your status and makes you more influential. All of these 5 things means you're more likely to be able to achieve your goals. Okay? And if you achieve your goals, you then get what's called the winner effect, a biological effect in the brain of success, which increases slightly your chances of a future success. So confidence is exponential. It works like compound interest because of the winner effect. So there's plenty of research studies. You don't have to look. This is just looking at the brain in a confident versus non-confident state. And there's the summary. So the feeling of confidence is associated with increased activation in reward, memory, and motor-related areas, including the bilateral striatum and the hippocampus. Okay? So confidence does important things to your brain that makes you more likely to be able to do the thing that you're planning to do, which of course it becomes self-reinforcing. Less confidence linked with activation in areas to do with negative affect, emotion, and uncertainty, including the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex, the kind of thinking about yourself in the middle of the prefrontal cortex. Oh, what about, I wonder if I can do this, or I don't think I'm able to. All the areas that get activated when the saboteurs of inaccurate aging mental models infiltrate your brain. So that's perfect timing. So the BrainHealth project is several thousand people have signed on to do the BrainHealth Index, and they speak to a coach who gives them feedback about their profile of their strengths and weaknesses in terms of 3 dimensions: clarity of thinking, emotional balance, and connectedness to people and purpose. These are all critical elements of your brain health. And so then there's a glorious website with a huge number of very smart interventions that people can do, online training. The smart training developed by Sandy Chapman over the years, brilliant strategic attention, how to control your attention and use your brain in ways that are efficient and don't fatigue you and maximize its potential. Stress management training, advice about sleep, and more recently, fantastic programs by Bonnie Pittman, the former director of the Dallas Museum of Art, on doing something new, which creates novelty experiences in the brain, which has profound effects on the neurochemistry of the brain, and also the power of observation, of using attention to enrich the world and to make you more creative. And that links, of course, to the smart training developed here, which is about the power of innovation and controlling your attention. Because if you can control your attention, you can control most of what else goes on in your mind: emotions, behavior, and performance. So this is what we have here over 6 months, is the changes in brain health of a group of people. The top is the Brain Health Index. That's the average of the 3 dimensions. The bottom are the 3 dimensions. And this is by usage. How much did they use the website? How much did they go on and do the courses? The stress management, the smart training. So these are objective measures of, if you like, the dose of the intervention they got. And you will see that the low, modest, and high, the higher your use, the more your improvement on your brain health index across all 3 dimensions. Okay? So exercising control and choice and defying the inaccurate mental models about what you're supposed to be able to do when you're old or not produces these very marked effects. And it's not just that, but some people started off as low users, but then changed 6 months or a year later to become higher users. So we could then look what happened when people changed their usage. And that's what we get here. People who stayed low usage versus people who went low to modest usage versus low to high. When you changed your usage, in other words, this wasn't just about who you were at the beginning. It depended on what you were doing, exercising control and choice in the program. You got a bigger improvement in your brain health index. Now, this is really, really important. This is about people like defying the disabling, sabotaging sources of these toxic feedback loops in the brain. So, and I'll just say, one of the 3 elements here of the Brain Health Index is connectedness, how connected you feel to social, to other people, and to a sense of purpose. And we know that all sorts of factors affect our what status we perceive to have. Okay, all sorts of social, racial, age, physical appearance, all these factors that affect, I guess, our kind of self-rating of our social status. And you might think, oh, that's, at my age, inevitably I'll feel less status than some smart 30-year-old who's nipping at my heels, and but there's a wonderful antidote to that, which relates to this question of connectedness, and that is again from Martinez in Columbia University, showing that these same measures of PET measures of your reward networks, vigor in terms of the number of receptors for dopamine there, are related to your perceived social support. So the extent to which you perceive yourself to have social support provides this biological boost to the brain as an antidote to the effects of, say, for instance, feeling low in social status. So, to finish off, feeling confident about control of your brain health means you're confident about life. Because if you feel confident about your brain, you're going to be confident about life, including about life as we get older. And both of these are self-fulfilling prophecies. These are benign self-fulfilling prophecies. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So I want each of you, not really, but to write down, what did you come in here not feeling confident about? And now you're going to say, I can do it and it can happen. I want you to, when you leave here today, I want you to take that challenge. What is something that you've been telling yourself, oh, I can't do that? I want you to take what you've heard today and enact it. Not just say, oh, that was fascinating, doctor. I want you to take this information and try to build your confidence. Thank you so much for very, very stimulating. And I'm thinking what I tell myself I can't do, and I'm going to do it. And I want, yeah, let's go. So I want you to report back to me next week when I see you. So we've got some time for some questions. So raise your hand, and then we'll look online. And Kay's going to help us with some of the online questions as they come up. But raise your hands. I know you have lots of questions coming up.
Please tell us a little bit about dopamine. That topic comes up a lot. How do we get more of it?
Well, there inevitably are some biological changes that happen. You can't deny there are biological changes that change the brain structure, including the number of cells in the substantia nigra. That does happen, particularly. And again, I'm setting aside disease here, okay? But there is plasticity in all the brainstem nuclei. There is plasticity. That means that with stimulation and demands on them, they at least grow more connections with each other, and therefore maintain higher levels of function, say, of the dopamine system than you would get otherwise if you didn't make demands on them. So physical exercise, physical training, for instance, has effects on the dopamine. Certain types of physical training has effects on the dopamine system. Purposeful engagement with the life and the world increases the vigor of the dopamine system. And I'll just say one other thing about the dopamine system. When you do fMRI studies of working memory tasks that people of my age do much worse at than people who are in their 20s and 30s, you see differences in the activation in the frontal and parietal cortex. There's different levels of activation there. And people have assumed that this represents loss of cortical function with aging. However, Lars Nyberg in Sweden was one of the few studies that also measured PET function of dopamine system in the same people. And when he statistically covaried for the dopamine changes, or the dopamine differences, most of the cortical differences disappeared between old and young. So, in other words, we're homing in on a critical system, that system to do with motivation and drive. And there is some plasticity in that system. So it's about being purposeful, connected, active, and engaged. and doing physical training as well.
So it goes back to actions versus what pill can I take that people want to
Exactly.
know.
Yeah.
So,
My question has to do with a change with the culture, but specifically the culture of the medical professionals. Because medical professionals, when you come to my age and much younger, what the first question is, what is your age? And how many times have you fallen in the last 6 months?
Yeah.
So the whole circumstance, or I happened to see somebody in orthopedics, nothing to do with my brain. The first thing the man said to me was, well, I'm sure at your age, your family doesn't want you to be driving, and why aren't you living in independent assistance? And I'm looking at the man and saying, I am out every day, I am busy, I have too many things, I have a purpose in life. But the medical profession does not encourage that in people over whatever age they want to pick. 60,
I can feel my
65.
blood pressure going up as you say that.
Yes, and it is, and so is mine. Mine is not. It's usually 109 over. So, but the whole point of healthcare is in a different place than what you're talking about.
Because they're working on inaccurate and outdated mental models.
What do we do to change?
We need to get onto the brain health. We need to do what you're doing. We have to show them what we can do. And we by example, and we have to challenge them when they say things like that. Yeah.
yeah, I think challenge the doctors. I know, because someone said, they said my knee was, well, it's a, XY age knee, and well, my other one's the same age, and I don't have those problems. So are there some online questions?
One of the questions online was, what number do I subtract from my age if I'm 75 and in great shape? And will we see a peak and then you're subtracting fewer years as we get older?
That's such a great question. And I to emphasize, the only data point that gave the subtraction slide I gave was the 70 to 50. We don't know for sure. But what we do know for sure is that people are becoming biologically younger, and that's continuing. Whether that trend will continue with Gen Z and the high anxiety rates, because stress, chronic stress is a risk factor for brain function, I don't know. So we cannot assume that that will continue. The rise in IQ that happened through the 20th century, the Flynn effect, stopped about the year 2000 and started to go down a little bit. We're seeing a loss of attentional function in people who have lost the ability to read a whole book, for instance. I mean, even in elite universities, professors are not able to give, I believe, whole books to students to read. And if your attention capacity declines because you're used to 30-second bites on TikTok, and sustained attention is a muscle, like a muscle, has to be reinforced. Yeah, so great question. The answer is I don't know. But if you're 75 and very fit, honestly, minimum 20 years. Think of yourself as 55, really, be my advice.
Dr. Wade.
Hi, Ian. Thank you so much for an inspiring talk. It was really great. I wanted to follow up on something, on the question you asked regarding the role of the medical profession. And because I've been thinking about this a little bit more broadly. I think self-empowerment to be confident is critical, but there's also a role of the environment more broadly, and and that includes society and maybe even our built environment. So maybe this is more of a question regarding, what we can think about at the level of policy to enable individuals to live in an aging life that's more confident, right? You had a comment regarding a distinction between Americans versus Europeans, the latter thinking about that, growing older much more. So that leads me to suspect there's something different happening across contexts.
It's a great question. So, in Europe, there's much more of a pension culture, because depending which country you are, I've got my pension, therefore you stop working. And there was a beautiful study done across the world looking at the difference in cognitive function between 65-year-olds and 55-year-olds, okay? Similar to the World Health. So, and then they covariate. So how much mentally duller was a 65-year-old than a 55-year-old across countries? This study was done 20 years ago. And then they correlated it with pension age, the retirement age. And what they found was in places like America, where the retirement age was not nearly as prevalent, you got a much smaller difference between 65 and 55-year-olds than you did, say, Italy and France, where you have these early retirement ages. And there's another French study showing that self-employed people, very generous pension schemes they have, they could choose to retire in their early 60s at no financial penalty compared to going on to 65, and they found significantly higher dementia rates than those who retired earlier. So policy about finding ways to incentivize people financially or in other ways to realize that the world's population is now just declining in developing countries. We need 70 and 80 and 60-year-olds to be contributing purposefully to the society. So that'd be one way of doing that. And maybe there's architectural things involved to do with co-working spaces, incubator plants for 70-year-olds, whatever. Why not start a company? Yeah.
Same problems. Okay, good. Everybody's questions have been great and have caused me to have several questions for you. First of all, your comment about have you fallen? Yes or no. But the second question has begun to be, do you worry about falling?
Exactly.
Well, no, I didn't worry about falling until you kept asking me. That was the first thought. The second thought was your internal saboteur, that you use the phrase saboteur.
Yeah.
It seems that you're saying that you can quiet that saboteur
Yes.
by your attitude, rather than by just the fact that it was a reduction in dopamine. My first question was going to be, which comes first, the internal saboteur or the reduction in dopamine? Do you? But it sounds like
the answer
you're
is we don't know. There's not been enough. There's been so few studies done on actual dopamine function, and so we don't know. But in terms of what you do about it, you said change your attitude. Absolutely right. But the second thing is take action. Remember, confidence is about action. It's about doing stuff. And Rumi, the Persian Afghanistani poet, in the 13th century, he said, the path only appears with the first step. And if one of the great challenges of apathy, whether it's apathy because you feel about your age or apathy because of your social class or some other factor, is that, and indeed chronic anxiety does this, it holds you back from taking action. And the moment so just taking action, even if you're not sure where you're going, taking that step forward changes your perspective. You suddenly see things that you couldn't see from where you were before. Thoughts occur to you, people you meet. So just taking action, and that's the critical thing about building that antidote to the saboteurs, which is attitude and action fueled by confidence.
This is a two-part question, Ian. As we're learning more about how engagement during the day drives restoration at night, how do you see the brain's lymphatic cleaning system fitting into the story of cognitive longevity? Could increased daily cognitive and emotional engagement actually prime the lymphatic system for more efficient overnight clearance, helping people age with sharper, more youthful brains?
Whoa, what a great question. Give that woman or man a PhD. The microglia in the brain are part of a system that dampen down inflammation and also help clear out debris at night, particularly in deep sleep. The debris, like bits of, we all have amyloid protein in our brains and tau, is cleared out at night. And what we know is that I don't know of any data about precisely that clearance function in relation to what the engagement question, but there are data about the inflammation question, which is, and the norepinephrine system of the brain in appropriate doses of levels of norepinephrine helps the anti-inflammatory processes of the brain, and which is incredibly important. And of course, norepinephrine, when is that generated? It's generated whenever you're challenged by something that's difficult, but not too difficult, by taking on a task, by speaking at that meeting, by getting out and walking when you didn't feel you could. It's about individually tailored goals that stretch you, the goals that are in the sweet spot of not too easy and not too difficult. That's when norepinephrine is triggered in your brain. The other times, when else is it triggered? It's triggered when you do something new, novelty. Novelty triggers norepinephrine. So difficulty within a range that confidence can bridge, and novelty are two things. So that's why engagement with life, the answer is yes for the inflammatory system. Yeah.
Doctor, wow, we're out of time. So amazing. Please join me in saying, can't you see why I'm so lucky to get to work with this amazing scientist? Thank you.
Thank you very
Dr.
much.
Robertson.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I think he inspired all of us to find our inner confidence and the saboteur to go down, to dampen him down and put him away, and to know whatever you're telling yourself you can't do, you're going to change that inner talk. Thank you. I hope you'll join us, because what we're all about is making sure your brain is strong every single day and you take steps to do it. Next week, we are going, please join us again. We'd love to have an amazing crowd like this, and thank you for your online attendance as well. Dr. Massimo Bardi, who's professor in behavioral neuroscience at Randolph-Macon in Virginia and the University of Pisa in Italy. Well, what a great place to go, Virginia, Italy. He's going to talk to us about the road to recovery among cancer patients, the role of resilience, and the neuroendocrine profiles. Join us next week and go forth and write down what it is that you're going to change your talk and say, I can do it, it can happen. Thank you for joining us.